Hello viewers, continuing part 2B of how unlawfully the smallest city in Canada called Greenwood governs their day-to-day affairs against the interest of Canadians and people who come to invest in their city, and why City of Greenwood is still considered a rural part of Canada. I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, if the smallest city in Canada is still rural, how does Canada call themselves a developed country? In order to understand how cities in Canada work, I think it's important to understand how Canada functions and how the regulatory framework and governance is structured in Canada. Let's start with a bigger overview of Canada. Canada is considered a developed country with 10 provinces, which in some countries are also called states, and 3 territories to the north, like the Union territories in some countries. Now, overviewing the map of Canada, let's start with the 10 provinces, starting from the west coast. Let's start with British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. On the north, we have 3 territories called Yukon, Northwest Territory, and Nunavut. Pretty big country. Now let's look at a map of BC, which is one of the provinces in Canada we looked at a little earlier. Now, on one end, it's covered by the Pacific Ocean, and some parts of British Columbia touch the US border because it's connecting Canada and US by land. Let's look at the closer look on British Columbia. Now, British Columbia, for ease of reference, let's just say it's divided into certain regions, which is how it is governed or labeled for ease of reference. Victoria, which is the capital of British Columbia, is part of the Vancouver Island. We are concentrating on the Thompson, Okanagan, and the Kootenay region, which is where some part of interior BC and the smallest city of Canada called Greenwood, which is what we are concentrating today. Now let's try and find where Greenwood is. A map of the Okanagan and Kootenay Rockies, which is part of the interior BC. It's a Highway 3 town which connects parts of BC to the next province, which is Alberta. Come to think of it, I couldn't even find Greenwood in any of the maps. So surprisingly, the smallest city in Canada does not even exist on any of the maps that are publicly available. For ease of reference, I will start with the Suyas, and another next known town on the map is Grand Forks. Now, Greenwood is a very, very small town, about 31 kilometers before the city of Grand Forks. So just to put in perspective, the distance between Osoyoos and Greenwood is about an hour and a half drive on a good day, because in the winter it's a 1-lane highway, and with mostly covered in snow, can be very, very tough and hard to commute to civilization. Now let's look at how Canada is administered in terms of functionality. Now, on a federal level, of course, Canada is governed with the federal government, which is elected. All the 10 provinces are governed by provincial government. Like in most countries, you have a state government, which is also publicly elected in a democratic manner. Territories, which are usually constituted under the federal law, also have certain structure which governs. In the provincial government, premier, who's an elected official, is the head of the government to run the affairs of the province. And of course, he can't run the whole province, so the province is then divided into smaller cities with municipal governments to run the day-to-day affairs of various cities. Now, Greenwood in British Columbia is a city and is considered a smaller city in Canada with less than 600 people as their population. Now, municipal governments run the city affairs through the power vested with a function called council members, which are a bunch of people who are elected through a democratic voting process for a certain term. So does the municipal government of Greenwood. It's a different fact that they really don't run the affairs in a lawful manner to begin with. Now let's look at the Local Government Act, which decides or lays out a simple methodology or calculation to classify certain municipalities based on their shape and size. According to Section 10, if population in any area is not greater than 2,500, it should be a village. For any area to be declared as a city, the population has to be greater than 5,000. Greenwood has a population of less than 600 people. Why is it still considered a city and still a rural area is something which will be very, very interesting for all of us to discover. If any one of you want to understand how the local governments and municipalities work in Canada, I encourage you to go and have a look at the website that I have highlighted here. I'm sure most of you want to see how Greenwood, which is considered a rural area in British Columbia, looks like. This is Highway 3, a main state highway, which connects British Columbia to Alberta. These few buildings are considered the downtown. I would say about 8 buildings in total on both sides of the road constitutes something called downtown. Let's start with the purchases Mr. Goswami purchased. We'll start with the Greenwood Motel that he took over in May of 2016. It's you can clearly see that it's a highway property, which is coming from downtown, right from somewhere here, going all the way to Grand Forks and continuing. Now, looking at the downtown, one of the main buildings Mr. Goswami purchased in May 2016 was the Pacific Hotel building, this yellow-green building. I want you to pay attention to the broken windows when he purchased the building. Now, the building had 2 parts. The two upper 2 floors, which was the hotel, was supposed to be the hotel, never functioned as a hotel for over 60 or 70 years. The ground floor, which is a part on the National Highway, has Pacific Grill as a restaurant on one side and a section which was not really utilized in the building. So Mr. Goswami purchased the operating business, which was Pacific Grill, and this is what it looks like. Of course, all the decors was enhanced by Mr. Goswami with his personal touch. But unfortunately, City of Greenwood and Wendy Higashi were envious. They didn't want him to function. Especially the previous owner who sold the business to Mr. Goswami, called James Natharist, was a city council sitting to govern the city of Greenwood. How better can it get for a new owner to start a business with the outgoing business owner sitting on the council ready to shut down the day after he sold the business to Mr. Goswami? Why did he do that? We'll find out. Now, I mentioned the previous owner of this building called the Windsor Hotel. Of course, Mr. Goswami named it the Windsor Hotel because earlier, these are the two floors of the building, which was adjacent to the Pacific Hotel or Pacific Grill building. Never functioned as a hotel. The lower floor, which is the ground floor, facing the highway, ran it as a Greenwood Saloon Inn. Now, like most of you, Mr. Goswami originally thought salon means a haircutting salon. Later on, he found out the salon means a beer bar. This salon was considered to be the oldest bar in Western Canada. Here is a picture back in the days, maybe 60 or 70 years ago. These two buildings stayed intact. So these are the historical buildings Mr. Goswami purchased with the intention of restoring and bringing them back to full functionality. Of course, City of Greenwood, especially Wendy Higashi and the people who supported her, did not want Mr. Goswami to do that. Why? Is a very, very big question. And we will all discover and find the true facts behind this whole drama that was created to make sure that all the businesses purchased will eventually fail because they were meant to benefit anyone other than Mr. Goswami. Now in July 2016, let's look at the downtown Greenwood, if you can call it, from an angle. If you are going from Grand Forks towards Osoyoos, here's the Pacific Grill building, here's the Greenwood Saloon building. Mr. Goswami bought another heritage building called the Brick Building. It used to be a sewing motion store owned by one of the Americans back in the days. Mr. Goswami bought this building with the intention of opening the first supermarket. Because of the shape and the size, it was ideal, because all the merchandise sold in the Greenwood Superstore would benefit the local economy, will save the residents to travel 30 to 50 kilometers one way to buy anything decent and as basic as fruits and vegetables, and will help more people wanting to come and stay in Greenwood. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. We'll find out why. In August 2016, Mr. Goswami also bought a large piece of land right on the Highway 3 in the middle of the city and intended that he would be building a shopping mall with a couple of floors of apartment buildings, which will encourage more seniors or more tourists to come and enjoy the nature in the interior parts of BC. Let's look at a recap. In 2016, Mr. Goswami bought the Windsor Hotel building, Pacific Hotel building, the brick building to open the supermarket, a large piece of land to develop a shopping mall, and Greenwood Motel. I'm sure all the viewers will agree, for one single individual to invest in so many properties in a city with less than 600 people would be considered a very, very significant investment. And a hope and a greater plan to uplift the economy in the city. Why would anybody in the city not want that progress? There is a very, very big reason the municipal governance in the city of Greenwood didn't want the economy to grow and want Greenwood to remain rural. Now, in order to make sure that the hotels could expand and have sufficient parking lot, this is the backside of the Pacific Hotel building. So Mr. Goswami bought an empty piece of land right behind that. You can see the condition of the city and the roads. And he also bought another piece of land which was at the backside of the Windsor Hotel. Now this was done with the intention that when the hotels are expanded, there will be plenty of parking and other supporting structures without having to squeeze the growth opportunity that the property is required in order to promote the overall growth in the city. Next to the brick building, he also bought another piece of land that would be considered a supplementary storage facility for food and other supplies so that the supermarket can function at a much larger scale, promoting tourists and other visitors and other residents to come and make Greenwood their home. This, of course, would have enhanced the population and uplifted the economy and structure for other businesses which were really struggling, and Greenwood, BC was turning into a ghost town. Now, in October 2016, 3 months after Mr. Goswami purchased multiple properties, with the growth plan, with all the plotting and hatching against him, with the outgoing owners attempting to cancel his licenses that they just sold for running businesses, Mr. Goswami managed to open the first 24-hour Highway 3 pit stop in the Windsor Hotel building. The mayor at the time, Ed Smith, actually inaugurated. There was a local newspaper journalist who came, took lots of pictures of the opening, never covered the opening of the event in the local newspapers. Upon finding, when Mr. Goswami inquired why the launch of the first 24-hour store in a 200-kilometer radius was not published in the local newspaper, the excuse given was that the mayor has said that there is a stop work order on the building, so the opening should not be covered. Now, the pit stop didn't last for over a week. Reason? Breaking the windows, stealing the equipment and the property, and making sure that this becomes a ghost building. Let's Let's look at how the municipal governance happens. Now, there's something called the Community Charter, Chapter 26, which lays out some of the ways any municipal government should work. Now, municipalities which operate through their elected council members are considered a part of an administration which will run the city and should be elected democratically and supposed to be responsible and held accountable like any other government entity. And their function is to serve the municipal communities that they govern. Does this really happen in Greenwood? We'll find out. Now, close look at the Community Charter, which governs the City of Greenwood like any other city. Section 3 outlines the purposes of the Act. And like most of you will imagine, that the purpose of the Act would be to act in accordance of the legal framework and for the purposes for which the municipal government through the council is elected. They're supposed to act in the best interest of the public and the communities and respond to the different needs and changing circumstances. Now, a town which was turning into a ghost town with someone like Mr. Goswami coming in and wanting to restructure and give a great boost to the economy, one wonders, why would an elected official and the so-called council in the city of Greenwood with less than 600 people would be against the interest of their communities? Why would they insist that a business owner who after 20 years was the first one to buy any property in Greenwood and the town was struggling, why would he face such resistance from the local government? Now, Section 7 of the Municipal Governance outlined in the Community Charter says that the municipality should be fostering the economic, social, and environmental well-being of its community. Mr. Goswami and his plans for the City of Greenwood were ideal for the economy, especially since its incorporation for over 100 years. Greenwood has remained a rural area and the city still runs in losses and heavily relies on the government grants to pay their bills. There must be a reason why the local government, perhaps with some parts of the provincial government, is happy to write millions of dollars to the City of Greenwood to continue to function as a city where a local area has not been developed and is still considered rural. Now, Division 2 of the Charter, Community Charter, Section 15 outlines how licensing and standard authority should govern any municipality to run any business. Of course, the law allows suspension or cancellation of licenses, but the same law also requires that providing for reconsideration or appeals of decision made with respect to the granting, refusal, suspension, or cancellation of licenses, permits, and approvals. Now, this is very relevant in Mr. Goswami's case because, as I mentioned in the previous video, that all his businesses were subjected to a lot of drama, if that's the correct word to say, that was thrown in his direction without any explanation in the name of the law, which didn't exist. Now we learned in October 2018, after Mr. Goswami on a Friday served the Minister of Finance with the petition, next Monday and Tuesday, something happened with October 23rd, a letter coming to his businesses saying these business licenses are canceled by provincial order from the Ministry of Finance. Of course, signed by the most incompetent chief administrative officer any city could hire. Now, there wasn't any copy of this provincial order. And we also learned that with this letter of Wendy Higashi came a letter from another incompetent officer called Michelle Lee, who claimed certain mumbo jumbo about almost naming every business Mr. Goswami owned and claiming some reactivation of PST had been denied. Why did the letter addressed to Mr. Goswami of 22nd October was sent to Wendy Higashi of October 23rd, even before it was sent to Mr. Goswami, is a mystery that will answer a lot of questions, and we are going to discover it together. Now, of course, canceling business licenses was not going to give Wendy Higashi the kick that she needed. She had to feel more powerful, so she discovered a unique way to harass Mr. Goswami. She discovered some new notices of closed and insisted that these are posted on the signboards of the businesses so that she can cause public humiliation and send a message across to the neighboring communities that these businesses are closed. Of course, nobody would find out why they are closed, thus giving a strange message, causing a shadow of doubt against the business and the business owner. And of course, these closed notices on false grounds were posted to cause damage to his image, financial losses with no explanation. Now, of course, any municipality has the power to, run the city, issue business licenses, cancel business licenses, but their fundamental power is limited, and their rights and privileges must be exercised in accordance with the Act. Wendy Higashi or the elected councils cannot make up their own rules. They cannot say an act against the Act and cause damage and violate the laws of the residents or any other Canadian or a foreign national for that matter who comes to the city. That would not be a democratic way or a lawful way any city in any part of the world could govern. Well, of course, City of Greenwood is an exception because we will find out there is no law. It's my way or the highway. That's the way Wendy Higashi and the incompetent council members who have a vested interest in keeping the city a ghost town. Now the Business License Authority, under the Act, very, very clearly outlines in Section 60, Sub 5, which says if a municipal officer or employee exercise duty to grant, refuse, suspend, or cancel a business license, the applicant or license holder who's subject to the decision is entitled to have the council reconsider the matter. Now, that would be a fair thing to do, because if somebody is exercising the right to cancel or suspend your license, the person should A, be told what is the reason, B, should be given an opportunity to send his reply, and then the elected democratic way of election, the council members would consider the matter. That's what the Act says. But guess what? No one follows the Act in the City of Greenwood. Now, on the day the closure notices were put on, when the staff informed Mr. Goswami, of course, like any other prudent businessman, he wrote to the city the same day. He copied the council members, Michelle Lee, who's the director of PST, Minister of Finance, Attorney General of BC, Heritage Credit Union, who's the, credit union which holds the mortgages on the multiple properties, and the PST staff, who was already dealing with the matter and against whom Mr. Goswami had already taken an action. Of course, Mr. Goswami wanted to find out why these closure signs have been put on, because both the letters didn't make any sense. For whatever advice and knowledge that he acquired from the process, he didn't understand why a provincial order from the Minister of Finance should be stated in the closure notices and not being provided a copy of. Upon inquiring from other residents of the city, all of them claimed that they have never ever seen something like this happen to any business in Greenwood. In fact, some of them said, city doesn't even issue any licenses. That's the reason the city is a ghost town, let alone the issued licenses cancelled, stating it's a provincial order from the Ministry of Finance. Why was this Ministry Finance order was stated in the letter? Now, of course, in the previous video, we discovered that it took the Ministry of Finance and the people who wrote the letter 7.5 months to inform that there is no such thing called the provincial order from the Ministry of Finance. So why the business licenses were closed in October 2018? The only two people Mr. Goswami could find the answer was City of Greenwood and the council, especially Wendy Higashi, because she signed the closure notice letter, and Michelle Lee. So October 23rd letter was never replied to, of course, because it was never meant to reply to. It was the biggest bluff Wendy Higashi pulled off while serving a government office. Now, of course, not getting any answer on October 23rd till 29th, Mr. Goswami had no option but to write to Michelle Lee, alarming her what her letter sent in breach of his confidentiality to City of Greenwood has been translated into a closure notice, though he couldn't connect the both, because Wendy Higashi's letter said provincial order of the Minister of Finance. So Mr. Goswami put all the papers together and sent 164 pages of a formal letter asking for a response. It was his right to know Where is this provincial order, and on what basis such claims have been made? Did Michelle Lee even acknowledge this letter? We all know from the previous video that that acknowledgement came 7 months later. Why this happened? We will find out that too. And that's how we will connect all the dots and see what really happened at that time. Of course, at that time, Mr. Goswami didn't understand because no one was giving any answers. So he suddenly has two independent pieces of information in form of two letters signed by two crazy women holding a public office, because that's what it is. Signing letters that have no relevance in any of the law which allows them to exercise the power they were using to damage, hurt, and cause immense loss to the image and businesses of a businessman who invested millions of dollars in the smallest city of Canada called City of Greenwood. Now we learned he was asking that because the Business Licensing Authority, which governs the business regulation and the power given to Wendy Higashi, subsection 5 of section 60 of the same Act allows Mr. Goswami to be given an opportunity and an explanation or a due process to understand his rights and the clarifications that the municipal government issuing and exercising such rights must provide. Now, of course, not receiving any response to his October 23rd letter, on October 31st, 2018, Mr. Goswami, as per section 13.1 of the Business Bylaw number 924/2018 of the City of Greenwood, he sent a formal appeal letter to the City of Greenwood demanding that his appeal document should be acknowledged, and he demands explanation or the process that he should follow to get the answers that he seeks. Of course, he didn't get the answers that he sought because that was not part of the agenda. The part of the agenda was to keep him in dark, bluff him, fraud him, mislead him into believing some order which didn't exist because there was a bigger conspiracy in place. Of course, at that time, it was all very dark. No prudent, reasonable man would expect what was coming in Mr. Goswami's way. Now, when Mr. Goswami wrote the October 31st letter, instead of acknowledging, Wendy Higashi wrote, "I'm not interested in your case against the Heritage Credit Union, but thank you for making this public. Do not send your massive amounts of paperwork to the City of Greenwood. That includes emails. It will be returned." Now, that shows the level of cooperation that Mr. Goswami would expect from the City of Greenwood. Now, he's asking for an appeal for the closure notice, and Wendy Higashi is saying, "Don't send me any correspondence. It will be returned." I have a question for my viewers. If your businesses are shut down with closure notices put on your businesses, causing you hundreds and thousands of dollars every day, what do you think you will do other than going to the people who passed such an order? Of course, they don't care because it was all part of a bigger plot that was to come to light at an immense cost. Now, Section 10 of the Community Charter, which outlines the relationship of the municipal laws with the provincial laws, it outlines and states, a provision of municipal bylaw has no effect if it is inconsistent with the provincial enactment. Sub 2 says, for the purpose of subsection 1, unless otherwise provided, a municipal bylaw is not inconsistent with another enactment if a person who complies with the bylaw does not, by this, contravene the other enactment. Now, Mr. Goswami didn't know what his businesses had done to be closed. No municipality or provincial law authorizes such a decision without following a due process. So Mr. Goswami was asking for a simpler explanation from Wendy Higashi and Michelle Lee of the Minister of Finance for the 2 one-page letters that caused havoc in his life. Closure notices on your businesses is not pleasant, especially when thousands and thousands of people passing by on a national highway driving through this town looks at the notices on the signboards. You know the amount of embarrassment that would cause any businessman. Well, that was the reason they were put to begin with. There is no law which says that you have to put them on notice. A simple letter by the City of Greenwood canceling the license for whatever reason they had in mind would have sufficed the purpose for which it was caused. But the closure notices were put on as a unique manner to cause damage to his image. Now, of course, Michelle Lee is also keeping silent and pretending she didn't hear anything. So Mr. Goswami had no option but to file an appeal. Now, what do you file an appeal to? Because you don't know what's happening to begin with. So given the only things which are outlined in the letter, Mr. Goswami on October 31st filled out the forms called appeal to the minister, which is what the law allows, and appealed. Let's see what he's appealing. He's appealing letter to the Honorable Minister of Finance, appealing letter of Michelle Lee dated 22nd October, which doesn't say much, and letter of Wendy Higashi, which doesn't say much either, other than the reference that is a provincial order by the Minister of Finance. Good bluff, pulled it off by these 2 women. So he also filed the appeal for the businesses that were outlined in the letter of Michelle Lee. So he filed the appeal for Pacific Hotel and the Windsor Hotel. On October 31st, he also filed the appeal to the minister for the other businesses mentioned in the one-page letter, saying the same thing for Greenwood Superstore and Highway 3 Pit Stop, asking the minister to reconsider. Now, which minister in any government would write one-page letter targeting 6 to 7 businesses with such ambiguous information that no reasonable person could understand? So Mr. Goswami sent in the appeal to the minister, like any other businessman looking for the answers as to why his businesses are shut. Now, clearly, Mr. Goswami was not in town on October 31st in Greenwood, so he sent in a fax from his company. And he also copied the City of Greenwood and every other person that you can think of who should be informed of the magnitude of the problem that his businesses face. Now, after receiving the copy of the tax appeal documents, which were sent to Ministry of Finance and copied to City of Greenwood, because they seem to have, somehow showing some connection. Of course, the connection was not clear, but as a prudent person, he wanted to make sure both the entities are equally informed on the correspondence of the other. Now, Wendy Higashi, being the incompetent administrative officer that she is, she points out no business license issued to this company in 2018. She was referring to Fraser Valley Management, which is one of the other companies Mr. Goswami uses or owns. She writes, "What business is this? Cannot find in our records." Of course, she's not really qualified to run as a CEO, because if someone sends a letter on behalf of a corporation clearly addressing the reason of the letter, which outlines that it is sending the letter out for Greenwood Motel, Pacific Hotel, Windsor Hotel, Highway 3 Pit Stop, and Greenwood Superstore, why would you write a letter like that? This was to make sure she was showing that she's not going to cooperate. Or let's say it was another way to pretend that she didn't receive this correspondence. Now, on October 31st, after receiving the appeal, instead of acknowledging the appeal, Wendy Higashi wrote, "I'm not interested in your case against the Heritage Credit Union, but thank you for making this information public. Do not send your massive amounts of paperwork to the City of Greenwood. That includes emails. It will be returned." Now, being the ignorant person she is, Wendy Higashi doesn't know that all litigations in Canada, except, certain personal litigations in the matter of family and children, all information in Canada is public. On November 2nd, she wrote, going one step further to make sure she's showing her true colors, she wrote, "The last correspondence to you." Let me read it out word for word. "The City of Greenwood is sending the last correspondence to you. You have been blocked from sending emails, phone, and fax due to harassments. The city is only receiving mail correspondence." Now, knowing Mr. Goswami is not in Canada at the moment and is traveling outside Canada, he's blocked from email, phone, and fax because Wendy Higashi, being a public servant, thinks that's harassment. Getting answers for the questions about why his businesses are shut down is called harassment to City of Greenwood. She now insists that he has to send a physical mail. And one of the reasons Wendy Higashi, we will learn in videos that are continuation to this one, is that if any mail is sent, she can conveniently ignore. Fax and emails were acknowledged and sent receipts are easily available to the sender. So Wendy Higashi wanted to make sure that she can block any trace of any correspondence sent by Mr. Goswami in this manner. Now let's see what Wendy Higashi's role is. Now, Section 147 dictates and outlines a bylaw under Section 146 may establish the position of Chief Administrative Officer of the municipality, whose powers, duties, and function include the following. A. Overall management of the operations of the municipality. B. Ensuring that the policies, programs, and other directions of the council are implemented. C. Advising and informing the council on the operations and affairs of the municipality. Now, considering Michelle Lee wrote a letter on October 22nd, allegedly on October 22nd, to Wendy Higashi. At 7:38 in the morning next day, she issues the cancellation notice. Clearly, there was no council involved, and Wendy Higashi was literally acting on her own accord without any information to the council or approval of the council or the council members, because there wasn't any council meeting held. Wendy Higashi, currently being a rural city in the city of Greenwood, acting as a CEO, gets paid in excess of $86,000 per year. This is huge for a city of 600 people, still struggling, still labeled as a rural city, relying on millions of dollars from the provincial government every year to even function, to hire a CEO charging $86,000, especially when such a CEO has no prior qualification, whether educational or experience, in public administration. Wouldn't you think it would be the ideal kind of CEO to hire when you want to do all the mumbo-jumbo way of operating a city? Especially when millions of dollars of grants are in question that the city gets, with Wendy Higashi having full access with the equally dysfunctional council members. But who's looking? Our Auditor General, who should be auditing such functions and abuse of the taxpayers' money in Canada, especially in the province of British Columbia, he's sleeping. No one cares where the millions of dollars are going and why such cities are rural and struggling, where they actively shut down every opportunity of growth granted available to the residents. Now, Section 117 outlines the duty to respect confidentiality. Now, let me explain to my viewers. In Canada, like in most countries, it's important that any government office respects the confidentiality and private information in the strictest of confidence. Of course, City of Greenwood doesn't function in a lawful manner to begin with, so why would we assume that Wendy Higashi or the council or any function of the municipal governance in City of Greenwood would be keeping their duty to respect confidentiality intact? Let's look at how many ways the confidentiality and privacy for the owner was violated. Now, Mr. Goswami, sometime in, I think, March of 2019, obtained an affidavit from a court file which wasn't in his knowledge. And by the way, such documents were not even scanned or made available to Mr. Goswami. He found out an affidavit signed by a lawyer named Chris Fraser, who practices in Kelowna, who had filed a claim against the truckland property because he was the owner who originally sold the property to Mr. Goswami. And we will cover this incident and this matter in greater detail in one of the next videos. But for now, let's look at some of the information which he highlighted. In response to my inquiry, I was advised by Andrea and an employee of the City of Greenwood that the property taxes for the subject properties were in arrears and had not been paid for 2 years. I did not ask the amount owing, but based on my past experience, I estimate the current taxes bill in the range of $10,000. During the same conversation, Andrea advised me personally from Canada Revenue Agency had been in Grand Forks trying to locate the respondent Goswami without success, and that according to their resources, Nitai Chand Goswami is now living in Dallas, Texas, and they now own property operating the businesses. She emailed me information that the City of Greenwood had obtained regarding Mr. Goswami, attached hereto and marked as Exhibit A. Now, of course, Chris Fraser, being the ignorant and unethical lawyer that we will find out, acting the way he acted, of course, had very limited knowledge that Mr. Goswami has been a resident in the U.S. much, much longer than he ever had been a resident of Greenwood or Canada to begin with. We'll find out that how Chris Fraser and Wendy Higashi hatched up the plan. Now, of course, this information was discovered much, much later in the time, but at that time, this was just one of the other parts that will connect the dots to how deep the conspiracy ran against Mr. Goswami. Now, the affidavit, Exhibit A mentioned in the affidavit, which was filed in November, carried an email dated September 21st, 2018, giving a lot of details, and was sent by Wendy Higashi and not Andrea, as the affidavit falsely dictated, and said, I heard you were looking for Nitai Chand Goswami. Nitai and, some private information are in Texas. There are a number of properties listed under Nitai's name in Dallas. I don't know how recent this information is. I have attached one property. The business information is accurate. They started the business in March 2018. CRA has been in the City of Greenwood looking for them, and the information regarding their current location has been forwarded to them as well. Now, Chris Fraser, being a lawyer, must be a very incompetent lawyer because he doesn't get the name right of the individual in his affidavit. He doesn't even get the name right of the city accurately. Now look at the detailed information Wendy Higashi writes to a lawyer against the confidentiality back in September, much earlier, when the October 23rd, 2018 incident of the closure of the property happened. Look what she writes: owner name, property address, land size. She also writes 817 Graham Avenue is a parcel of land located in Dallas, Texas, and has a legal description and whatever. The parcel is owned by Mr. Goswami and can be described as SFR, vacant land lots, estimated market value, blah, 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 which is inaccurate. For more information regarding 817 Graham Avenue included construction details, assessments, previous owners, and sale data, please look below. That's a lot of information known to Wendy Higashi, who seems to be not interested at all and is in future blocking Mr. Goswami. And she writes the name of a bunch of offices and companies with greater details, outlining the managers and the owners and the addresses and the age. Now, Mr. Goswami, being a US resident much longer than he ever was in Canada, him having businesses, in addition to his businesses in Greenwood, shouldn't be an area of concern to anybody. But clearly it was very important to Wendy Higashi, especially when she's doing such detailed information on him in breach and passing the information to other people. Now, someone like Wendy Higashi, who's not interested in anything apparently, she then writes, "Let me know if I could be of further assistance." Now, in most of the functionalities of a chief administrative officer, I couldn't find that one of the roles of the CEO of any city in Canada would be to assist non-residents, lawyers of other cities by assisting them by providing confidential information that has no relation to the City of Greenwood and breach the privacy. Why did Wendy Higashi in September 2018 was interested in what Mr. Goswami owns and doesn't own? There must be a reason. Now, we covered in September, she's writing to Chris Fraser. In October, she's canceling the business licenses. She's not acknowledging the appeals or replying to the appeals or giving any explanation. Minister of Finance and Director PSG are so conveniently quiet. Mr. Goswami learned in March 2019 that Wendy Higashi was also writing to the Interior Health, like I mentioned in the earlier video, that she was writing to all the other departments wanting to shut down the businesses and cancel other licenses. One of the emails I read earlier, and I'll read it again for the recap, written by Cynthia Watson, who's the Environmental Health Officer with the Interior Health, which issues the food licenses for all the restaurants which operate in the interior part of BC. We were advised last December by the City of Greenwood that these businesses were no longer operating, that the operator no longer resided in Canada. I wonder where did that come from. Further, I did not see these premises operating during my visits to Greenwood since that day. Now, Cynthia Watson should be seeing the closure notices on the businesses. If she was visiting the businesses, an email to the owner should have clarified the matters. How does an entity cancels the business licenses in December and does not inform the owner for 3 months, and for them to find out after they go and inquire to know what's happening with their food licenses? Now, food licenses and liquor licenses for the bar and the restaurant were deeply impacted by the decision of Wendy Higashi's closure notices, which were clearly unlawful because it had no relevance or excuse under the law, with no explanation given whatsoever. All the correspondence sent by Mr. Goswami in October, November, December, January, February, March were all ignored and never acknowledged. What do you do in a situation like that? You rely on a municipality or a government for that matter to protect and function in a lawful manner, whereas all they do is pretend you don't exist. I don't think I ever thought in my wildest dream this could happen in a developed country like Canada. Well, it's for real because it happened to real people. Now, while City of Greenwood is keeping quiet, Wendy Higashi certainly is not sitting quiet. Yeah, she's definitely not replying to any of the appeals and faxes and messages written by Mr. Goswami asking explanation because she very conveniently blocked him from email, faxes, or messages. She was not free. She was very, very busy hatching and plotting and putting other strategies in place to cause further damage. Here is one of the examples used by Heritage Credit Union, dated January 16, written by Wendy Higashi, saying, the City of Greenwood is extremely concerned about the properties abandoned by Untitled Swami. Then the letter said a lot of lies, but most of them will be covered in much greater detail, and the significance of the letter used by Heritage Credit Union to mislead the justice system, which conveniently wants to be misled to begin with, was all put in place. She mentions the word heritage building. Mr. Goswami on many occasions wanted a document from the City of Greenwood to justify the restorations and renovations for these heritage buildings. But guess what? He was actively blocked from doing anything during the 2.5 years that he worked very hard to work on these businesses. Why was Wendy Higashi writing to a credit union, which is like a bank, about Mr. Goswami? Why is she so concerned, and how dare she lie on file saying he's abandoned them? You shut down and put closure notices on the businesses. You don't issue business licenses for the businesses. Mr. Goswami maintains family and the support team which looks after these properties. Under what term or definition this called abandoned? I'm sure you're wondering what Mr. Goswami was wondering and has been wondering till date. The most significant part is this: the building had been abandoned. A window has been left open on the 3rd floor. See photo number 6, window partially opened, boarded up due to a break-in. Now, when you put closure notices on the building saying these are closed, wouldn't that attract people, thieves, rogues, to break open the buildings and loot? You clearly are telling people, I mean, as it is, Greenwood is a ghost town. Further putting the only functional businesses on the street with the closure notices slammed right on the windows and right on the main door, what do you expect? I will come to in details how a small window in a Windsor hotel building was concerned when the entire windows on another building for years was not an area of concern. She mentioned a guy called Robert De Silva as a building inspector. Wendy Higashi wrote he has a concern that if a water damage occurs in either of these buildings and mold and rot sets in, the whole block will be destroyed. Now, Mr. Goswami didn't receive any letter from this Robert Silva. Neither is he aware of any building inspection done by Mr. Silva. Now, all these bunch of lies were clearly done for a reason. What the reason was is something we will find out. This is some of the pictures which were attached to Wendy Higashi's January 16, 2019 letter, written to the Heritage Credit Union's lawyer Ryan Sukurov in Castlegar, BC, which is another town, which is where he practices from. This is a small opening of the window Wendy Higashi was referring. So according to Wendy Higashi, this small portion of the window left open, which is with a screen built into the window, which was clearly done as a mischief so that the photo can be taken to suit the purpose for which it was taken. According to Wendy Higashi, Robert Silva, who's the building inspector, was worried that through this small window opening, which is covered with net, there was a risk for the building, this entire building of Windsor Hotel, to be inviting mold and water. Who would believe such lies? One would wonder that this can't be happening. Unfortunately, the justice system clearly used these letters for the purpose they were written. Here are some of the pictures Wendy Higashi attached for the Pacific Hotel building. The pictures were taken with a clear intention to use an angle so that the notice periods are not very visible and appear insignificant. This is the backside of the the Pacific Hotel. And I don't know what this board is doing there. Clearly this is full of snow. I don't know what board she was talking about. Clearly someone put in the board in there, or the backside of the building to begin with, to look like as if something is going on or the building is in a bad shape. Now, I've shown earlier the pictures of the same building at the time they were purchased in 2016. They were in no better shape than they were now. In one of the other videos, I will show you with greater details when Mr. Goswami eventually found out what the hell is this window and cardboard doing in this building, and when they were removed, the true condition of the Pacific Grill building. I will share it with you for you to know that there was nothing going on. This was all one scary picture painted for which Wendy Higashi was very, very conveniently concerned. She wasn't concerned that she's put the closure notices on these businesses with no explanation or no opportunity for anybody to address these matters. But all of a sudden, she was very concerned about the safety of these buildings on false grounds. It's hilarious actually to find out how Wendy Higashi claimed that a small window opening of this much in the Windsor Hotel building runs the risk of the entire building to be inviting water and mold. However, the entire broken window on the Pacific Grill building, which was there to begin with from the day this building was bought in 2016 by Mr. Goswami, how come that didn't risk this building? How come the previous owners were not questioned on that? Well, that's a silly question to begin with. I should know the answer to that. The previous owner, James Natharist, is a council member who sits on the council of City of Greenwood. So why would he be questioning himself? But Wendy Higashi surely doesn't get paid to favor Heritage Credit Union, but in this case she was. She was actively writing letters to the lawyer of a credit union, painting a very, very clearly laid out strategy to suit whatever Heritage Credit Union was intending to do against the interests of Mr. Goswami, and how this all played out very conveniently in a predetermined manner, for which all these people were collectively plotting and planning for a very, very long time. So do you think Wendy Higashi stopped there? Absolutely not. Now, in February 22nd, she allegedly even went to the extent of writing an affidavit in favor of Heritage Credit Union. Allegedly witnessed or not witnessed by Ryan Zuckerov, which the Heritage Credit Union on 18th March 1919, where she writes a lot of mumbo jumbo and tells them false details, claiming a break-in, blah, 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 whatever the bank wanted, or the Heritage Credit Union, I would say, not the bank, because they're nowhere near the bank, a small little credit union who was holding the mortgage on the properties, wanted her to write. What's the connection between Wendy Higashi and Heritage Credit Union? Especially the local branch manager, Donna Durbin, is something we will cover in greater detail, because Heritage Credit Union and Donna Durbin had a very, very major role to play in all of this. Now, here are some of the photos Wendy Higashi attached to the affidavit that she wrote for Heritage Credit Union. Of course, one affidavit was not enough for Heritage Credit Union, so she wrote another one for Windsor Hotel building, as many as were needed by Ryan. Wendy Higashi clearly wrote lies with a clear intention to favor Heritage Credit Union's interest against Mr. Goswami's interest, actively misleading the Supreme Court in British Columbia. Was Wendy Higashi successful? Or was it so easy to be successful had it been any other individual than Mr. Goswami? Any reasonable, logical person would say, nah, that can't be happening. I'm sure any British Columbian judge sitting in the Supreme Court will be able to verify or allow Mr. Goswami to put his point of view or the true facts. Was he allowed to do that? No. Judge who was assigned to look at this matter, that we will cover in greater detail, wasn't interested, didn't want to see the facts. So, a bigger conspiracy that we will discover during our journey through these videos will become loud and clear. Of course, these are the famous pictures of the Windsor Hotel building with Wendy Higashi's affidavit, where she was so worried that, as per the building inspector Robert Silva, this small opening of a window would cause the water and the mold damage to the entire structure of the building. Not surprising anyone, Wendy Higashi wrote a third affidavit for the Greenwood Superstore building, basically writing the same stuff, but writing for each matter where Heritage Credit Union wanted her to lie and confuse the courts and mislead the courts. She actually recommended, saying, I make this affidavit in support of an application for a shortened redemption period and conduct of sale. Meaning, she was actually telling the BC Supreme Court that she is so worried about the condition of the buildings, which she's not aligned to conduct the business, which she's not writing in her affidavit, but she's telling the judge that she is writing this affidavit to support the application of Heritage Credit Union against Mr. Goswami's interest, and asking that the court should not give any time and allow the bank to sell the property on false grounds. Of course, here are the pictures for the brick building called the Greenwood Superstore building. And frankly, I couldn't understand what any judge would make out of this picture. What's the intention? I have no idea. What does this picture taken in the snow shows to any judge? I don't know. But they were there, so I'm sharing them with you. We earlier discussed the duty to respect the confidentiality. We all have learned that that didn't really clearly happen with Wendy Higashi, because she doesn't know what does that mean. She's not qualified enough to understand. Well, let's just put it that way. She is conveniently selective in what part of the law and the act she wants to use and implement and abide by when she wants to act in her role, which is sheer abuse of the power that is granted to her as a public servant. How all this played out, we will discover together with greater details. So let's summarize the role and actions of Wendy Higashi against Untitled Goswami and his businesses in Greenwood. She clearly failed to govern as per the municipal laws. She clearly failed to govern the affairs of the council as the bylaws outline in the act. She didn't perform her duties with any honesty. And integrity is something she doesn't understand. A lot of unlawful acts, some covering criminal acts, with a clear intention to target and damage Mr. Goswami and his businesses. She failed to abide by the laws that govern the municipal governance in Canada. As per the act that allows her to exercise the power against Canadian businesses. In summary, it's fair to say that she actively breached her duty to act with confidentiality. Should this be allowed? I don't think so. Should Mr. Goswami tolerate this utter nonsense that he's been subjected to? No. But he's a very patient man. He has faith in God that one day justice will be served. It's fair to say that Wendy Higashi clearly abused the power and position for all the unlawful acts with which she governed her conduct in regards to Mr. Goswami. And by the way, he's not the only one who suffered or is suffering because of such unlawful acts and governance in the city of Greenwood. Wendy Higashi clearly acted out of her jurisdiction and out of scope of her role. There is no act which allows her to behave and conduct the business of the city, or any city for that matter, in the way she did. She unlawfully targeted Mr. Goswami's multiple businesses just to cause loss. She clearly conspired to cause immense financial damage and image to Mr. Goswami and his businesses. Wendy Higashi had an intention to cause harm because she had a personal gain. What was her personal gain? How did she gain from such acts that she committed against the law? We'll find out. She clearly acted under the false pretext and misled to cause damage and trauma. Clearly, she wasn't doing this for nothing. Unfortunately, a lot of things came to the light at a much later date. While all these things were happening, clearly they were kept under the wraps to make sure that Mr. Goswami doesn't understand in how many multiple directions was he being attacked. So all his opportunity or any process and his ability to defend himself and his businesses were damaged irreparably. Do you think, is that all what Wendy Higashi did? You would think so. No, she did much more than that. She did much more than what appeared to the eyes. She did all that collectively with the help of a lot of people who were involved in this organized crime against Mr. Goswami. We'll go into each and every act of such criminal behavior from people in public office in much greater detail, because the courts in British Columbia does not have the patience to listen to the true facts. The justice system is dictated to make sure that none of these facts come out in the public domain. No justice is allowed to Mr. Goswami. And this is one of the reasons all these videos are made with greater detail, to make sure that the true facts remain in the public domain for all the viewers, and in the better sense of justice that Mr. Goswami seeks from the provincial government in British Columbia. I'm sure all of you want to know, is that all what Wendy Higashi did? I'm sure, like me, you want to know how and when did Wendy Higashi started all this abuse of power against Mr. Goswami. I'm sure you want to know how many other ways, how many other unlawful tactics Wendy Higashi used to damage, close, control, and cause losses, irreparable losses, financial losses, loss of peace and mind, cause a lot of trauma to Mr. Goswami and his family after shutting down his businesses and actively conspiring with Heritage Credit Union against Mr. Goswami's interest. Do you think she was acting alone? Mr. Goswami's biggest fear was, I hope she's acting alone, but she wasn't acting alone. Wendy Higashi is too little to pull this off on her own. We know for a fact Michelle Lee of Director PhD was the co-conspirator, and that's the reason she took 7.5 months to reply to a letter she could have written very easily to Mr. Goswami saying, sorry, Mr. Goswami, I have no idea why City of Greenwood and Wendy Higashi have shut down your businesses. I have no way of knowing why the closure notices are put on your businesses on the false grounds. Sorry, there is no provincial order by the Minister of Finance because there is no such thing. There must be a reason Michelle Lee didn't write that letter of clarification for 7.5 months, despite Mr. Goswami seeking the answers he sought from them. We will discover this and more in greater details, one step at a time, to make sure clear evidence is available in the public domain to ensure that Mr. Goswami's and the true facts of this incident and various matters involving Wendy Higashi and City of Greenwood remain clearly known to various government departments and concerned people without any restraint. In my next video, we will find the answers to the question, the million-dollar question. Is Wendy Higashi acting alone? Is that what she did? Or, for better words, is that all what Wendy Higashi planned to do? Who are the people who are supporting? Who's using Wendy as a pawn? What could be the possible gain of all these unlawful acts against Mr. Goswami? And what is it one wanting to achieve? It's not common to do this to one individual, especially which involves all his businesses, directly impacting his ability to make a living or live in a city. In my next video, I will be covering the modus of operandus and the tactics used by Wendy Higashi and the level of organized criminal activity in various departments and individuals working within the BC government in greater details, which will be the video coming up next. I thank you for your time.